With his gentle hand, he wounded my neck and caused all my senses to be suspended. I remained lost in oblivion. My face I reclined on the beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. Welcome to Trinity Fort Wayne's Lenten Retreat. This year we have named the retreat Forgotten Among the Lilies. And as you just heard, the title comes from the final line of St. John of the Cross's masterpiece of mystical Christian poetry, Dark Night of the Soul. The image of the lily is an evocative one. It is often associated with springtime, of course, also with the Blessed Virgin Mary, and in particular with the resurrection joy of Easter Day, when our own altar at Trinity will be surrounded by lilies. But we're not to Easter just yet. And so in the season of Lent, we prepare for that Easter joy by first tending to those cares that St. John mentions, the sorrows, the troubles, the ambiguities of our sometimes complicated lives that can create a sense of distance between us and God. The question is, what exactly do we do with them? In those dark nights of the soul that we experience, those times when we feel lost or frightened or weighed down, what is Jesus' invitation to us? That is something that we will explore together during this retreat. Whether you are joining us in person at Trinity this weekend or doing this as a self-guided online retreat, I invite you to dress comfortably, to keep a journal or a notebook on hand to write down any of the thoughts or insights that come to you, and to approach this time with a spirit of gentleness and spaciousness towards yourself. If you feel called into a time of deep silence, embrace that. If you prefer to be in dialogue with your fellow retreat participants, that's good too. For our in-person retreat, you will be able to choose at various junctures how much or how little conversation you engage in throughout the day. This is your time to be with God in whatever way you choose. But before we get to all of that, it might be helpful to know a bit about our guide through this experience, St. John of the Cross, or Juan de la Cruz, as he is known in his native country, Spain. Born in 1542 to an impoverished family, John attended a religious school as a young boy, and his teachers there noted his innate tenderness and compassion. As a young man, he served as a chaplain in a hospital for poor people who were dying of the bubonic plague and other diseases. At the age of 21, John joined the Carmelites, a large contemplative order of monks and nuns, and he went to study in Salamanca, one of the great universities of Europe at that time. However, while John excelled in his studies, it seems that he was on some level dissatisfied with the academy. And he sensed within himself a deeper attraction to a life of pure contemplation and silence and prayer, rather than one of scholarly achievement. Amidst this struggle to discern his path, a pivotal meeting took place that would ultimately define the rest of John's life. Shortly after he was ordained a priest at the age of 25, he met a fellow Carmelite, Mother Teresa of Jesus, whom we now know as Saint Teresa of Avila. Teresa was at this time working to establish a reformed version of Carmelite life, one that embraced simplicity and poverty and an emphasis on prayer, rather than the unwieldy and complex institutional character of many of the monasteries and convents of that time. John was deeply attracted to Teresa's vision, and soon thereafter he set out under her mentorship to establish the first community of men who would live under her reformed rule of life. It was at this juncture that he took on the religious name John of the Cross and embarked on his own particular ministries of teaching and spiritual direction, which included, for a time, serving as Teresa's own spiritual director. Now, this all sounds lovely and peaceful, but as we know all too well, in every time and place, things are more complicated than we might hope for them to be. Political controversies and tensions involving both the Carmelite order's leaders and the King of Spain led to increasing amounts of pressure on the communities that were living under Teresa's reforms, and John became a prime target amid the struggle. So in 1577, a group of monks and lay people and armed men broke into the quarters where John was living, and they seized him and they imprisoned him in a monastery in Toledo, Spain. He was locked alone in a dark room, only 6 feet by 10 feet, given only bread and water to survive on. The only air and light coming from a small slit in the wall in the ceiling, and he remained there for 9 months, sitting in the darkness, composing poetry in his mind, much of which, thankfully, he was able to write down later, and which is now considered some of the most beautiful poetry in all of Spanish literature. So, when we hear the words of Dark Night of the Soul, we can begin to see how this experience of imprisonment in the literal darkness gives the imagery a particularly poignant and powerful resonance, because it was indeed in the darkness that John learned to see with the heart, with the soul, rather than with his senses. He managed a daring and somewhat miraculous escape from the prison cell and was able to seek refuge with Teresa's order of nuns until he could be removed to a safer location. Eventually, after some time, the political situation stabilized and John was able to continue his ministry of spiritual direction in various communities in Spain. He also was compelled to begin writing down some of his teachings and his reflections, and these include the classical works of mystical theology, the Ascent of Mount Carmel, the Spiritual Canticle, the Living Flame of Love, and, of course, Dark Night of the Soul. John was somewhat reluctant, though, to put into words everything that he had experienced of God. For John, the power of language only went so far to convey the truths he had encountered in the silence, in the solitude, in the night. He died of a painful illness in 1588 at the age of 46, while listening to his companions read him passages from the Song of Songs. And his final words were those of the psalmist, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." John of the Cross's legacy is significant. Along with his friend and mentor Teresa of Avila, he is considered one of the greatest figures in Western Christian spirituality and mystical theology. A person whose encounter with the divine was almost beyond any description, beyond anything that mere words could capture. And yet the words he did capture and leave behind for us, his poetry and his teachings, are treasured for their vividness and their thoughtful guidance along the path of contemplative prayer. They come from a place of deep, challenging, and authentic life experience. And thus, John can identify with all of us who eventually stumble and struggle and find ourselves lost along the way in our journey of faith. It is this authenticity, I think, that resonates so deeply down through the centuries into our lives that might look very different from his. His works are not the idle musings of a dilettante, nor are they reflective of a disembodied spirituality, a cheap sort of mysticism. They speak in the voice of one who has paid the price, who has walked the way of the cross, who has risked everything for the most wondrous type of love, who has touched the darkness, who has been enveloped by the darkness, and who has learned its holy secrets. And what John reminds us is that the dark night, whatever it looks like for each of us, is not a place where God is absent. It is in fact a place where God waits for us, beyond our senses, beyond our usual ways of knowing. And as we make our way through Lent this year, perhaps facing up to the hard parts of our own life stories, John shows us how God meets us in those very places, inviting us to release all of our fears, our wounds, our anger, our dashed expectations, and our regrets, to release them into the night, to give them to Christ as we rest upon him, scattering our cares like seeds into the dark soil of the earth, from which one day a field of lilies will bloom. Whatever you are going through, whatever is on your heart in this season, may this retreat be a time for you of reflection, of consolation, and of peace. May you be blessed on this journey into the night. We'll see you very soon.